Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, and I'm joined today by one of our poets, Angela Alaimo O'Donnell, who writes many poems for the Christian Century, but we're going to be talking mostly today about her new book of poetry, which was recently reviewed in an issue of our magazine. The book is Dear Dante, so we're going to be talking about the poet Dante and the poems that appear in Angela's book. Before we dive into all that, Angela, can you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'm happy to. I'm coming to you from New York. I teach at Fordham University in New York City. The particular campus I teach on, the main campus is in the Bronx. I've been teaching at Fordham, a Jesuit Catholic university for 20 years. This is my 20th year. I teach courses in American Catholic Studies. I'm also the associate director of our Center for American Catholic Studies. I write a lot about Catholic writers. Flannery O'Connor is one of my favorite writers to write about, and I'm also a poet. This is my 11th book of poems, so I've been writing poems for quite some time.
That's great. And so before we talk about this book, we're actually going to hear one of the poems, which Angela will read for us, that shares a name with the book itself, Dear Dante, the first poem that appears in the book. So yeah, thanks for reading this, Angela, whenever you're ready.
Okay, great. And this is the poem that sort of started off the book. I didn't intend to write a whole book of poems about Dante, but I wrote this one, and then I was sort of off to the races and continued this conversation with him. So it's called Dear Dante, and there's an epigraph from the great Italian-American poet John Ciardi, who says, "A poem ought to be free to lie its way to the truth." And this is a sonnet. Dear Dante, all poets are liars. St. Thomas says so. Yet you choose verse to tell the truth. We glide along on your easy terza rima, each line, each hanging rhyme, pulling us into deeper, more dangerous waters. You can't look away, and neither can we, from the suffering shades, the pure agony of unchanging pain for eternity. No respite from the mind's and the body's fire. If you hated your kind, you could not dream a worse world than your endless hell. A liar's pandemonium no loving words can soothe. Lured by your language, we blindly follow you. Pray none of the things you write comes true.
Oh, thank you. Um, every time a poet reads a poem we here on this YouTube channel, I want to say amen at the end. It's they all feel powerful like prayers. But thank you for reading that. In the introduction to the book, you talk about how complicated your own sense of your relationship with Dante is. I think you call it double-minded. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about this double-minded relationship and what inspired you to work on this project.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been involved in a Dante reading group that I actually co-host on our campus for 7 or 8 years now. And so I've been had the pleasure of rereading Dante slowly over time. We read it a canto at a time. But I decided that in anticipation of the 700th anniversary of Dante's death, which was in September of 2021, I would spend the summer rereading all of the Commedia. So one canto a day, 100 cantos, 100 days of summer, it seemed perfect. So that's what I did. What I did not expect to happen, however, is for me to actually start talking back to Dante. So some of the episodes in the poem were deeply disturbing to me. Some of them, of course, were fantastically beautiful and powerful. And so I found myself writing poems that in some way answered Dante, engaged Dante in conversation. At times they challenge him. At other times they honor him, or pieces of homage. So there's this whole range. Sometimes the poems are very irreverent because we do have a tendency towards hagiography when it comes to Dante, whereas at other times, they're appropriately reverent given the subject matter. So yeah, and also my other angle on this was, I'm despite my Irish name, that's my husband's. My name is Alaimo. I'm Sicilian, Italian, and I thought how interesting it might be to have this conversation as a 21st century Italian American writer speaking to this 14th century Tuscan Italian writer, male. We're both Catholic. However, the church has changed somewhat in the last 700 years. It will not surprise us to know, as has our mentality. So, what does a modern mind versus a medieval mind do with the faith tradition that we've inherited? So, all of that is sort of tied up in these poems that I wrote to Dante.
Yeah, wow, thanks for describing that. I think you have another poem picked out that would maybe highlight some of the complexity of this relationship, some of your pushback to Dante. So whenever you're ready to read that for us.
Sure. All of these poems, by the way, are written in either both of the forms that Dante wrote in his famous Terza Rima, which of course he created for the Inferno, in which you have these three-line groupings, these tercets, that in which the first and the third line rhyme, and then there's a middle line, and then that middle rhyme gets picked up in the next stanza, and then the first and the third rhymes rhyme with that, and then there's another one. So it creates this wonderful effect of constantly throwing out ahead of you another new rhyme that you're going to have to follow up with. So it really does feel like, as this poem says, being dragged into deeper waters by the rhyme that Dante uses. So the poems are either in terza rima or they're in the sonnet, which Dante also wrote in. This particular poem is a sonnet. Those when we read Dante, when I read Dante with students, or when any of us encounter Dante as moderns, we do find people in hell that we don't expect to find there. And one of the kinds of people that we find there are the suicides. In our day, in Dante's day, suicide was thought to be a moral failing. It was a result of a spiritual state of desolation, which you should never have. And therefore, if a person commits suicide, they're damned. They're damned for eternity. Now, there are a couple of exceptions in Dante. There is a character who shows up in the Purgatorio, but it's because his suicide is for another reason other than because of despair. So this is a very distressing canto for us, and we don't know really what to do with it in many ways. So I wanted to address this. Um, I also wanted to add that Dante, he himself is very complex, because there's Dante the poet, and then there's Dante the pilgrim who's making his way through Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. So he has this interesting relationship with himself. And he frequently is very upset by what it is that he finds. He's frequently weeping. He passes out. He really has these very strong emotional reactions to what he sees. He has one of those reactions in this canto when he encounters the suicides. He can't even speak to them because he's in such despair about how much suffering they endure. And the particular suffering that they endure is they don't have any bodies. Their bodies have been taken away from them. They're just trees. And they're trees when you break a twig off, it bleeds. So Dante's response to this, and this is from Inferno 13, each of the poems begins with a quotation from Dante. Uh, he says, he's speaking about Virgil. The poet waited briefly. Then he said to me, since he is silent, the suicide, do not lose this chance, but speak and ask what you would know. And Dante says, do you continue? Ask of him whatever you believe I should request. I cannot, so much pity takes my heart. Dante among the suicides. The forest of suicides, the darkest place for Dante and for us. The tortured, faceless, their bodies are not theirs. No saving grace allows them to reclaim themselves. They are erased forever. Their flesh become dead wood, disgraced for a moment's mortal error. No place for mercy in their maker's mind. So base is this act in God's eyes. And yet, encased in Dante's chest is a heart like ours, birthplace of love for the sinner in the face of sin. He's learning that life is a race none of us can win. We're all in last place. Some of us fall, can't keep the killer pace. Perfection is a dream, a heartless chase. And one more thing I'll say about this poem is I didn't intend for this to happen, but as I began to write the sonnet, I realized that the first three lines had exactly the same rhyme: place, face, grace. And then I thought, oh, this poem should be a monorhyme. All of the lines should rhyme, and a kind of emulation of the kind of obsessive quality of suicidal ideation. And so it was one of those examples where the form leads you to a discovery that you had not, as a poet, really anticipated. So this is the only monorhyme in the book.
Oh, wow. Thanks for sharing that. It's interesting. Um, there's a topic that comes up, quite a bit of focus on it in the actual review that we published by Roger Furlow of your book. He talked quite a bit about the character of Beatrice and Dante's treatment of that character and your treatment of that character. I'm really a rookie with Dante. I read Inferno a long time ago. I've never read the other two. So, for those out there who are like me, who are coming at this a little cold, could you give us just a little background about Beatrice, and then go ahead and read your poem about her from the book?
Absolutely. Biographically, Beatrice was a real person. She was a young girl who lived in Florence. Her name was Beatrice Portinari, and Dante saw her when she was first saw her when she was about 9 years old and fell desperately in love with her. And he continued to be in love with her, even though she married someone else and he married someone else. There was always this image in his mind of this perfect beauty, this perfect innocent woman, girl that he had fallen in love with. And then sadly, she died at the age of 24. So for the rest of Dante's life, he sort of pined after this missed opportunity of knowing this Beatrice who represented this beatific vision of beauty to him. So she figures very prominently in the Commedia. And we first see her at the very beginning of the poem when Dante is lost in a wood and he's having a midlife crisis, basically, and he doesn't know how he is going to recover his faith and recover his life. So Beatrice, who is up in heaven, in paradise, actually comes down and speaks to Virgil, the great poet, and says, I want you to go and find Dante and take care of him and take him through hell and take him through purgatory and bring him up to me in paradise. But Virgil, you can't come to paradise because you're a pagan and you're not capable of having the Christian vision because you didn't believe in Jesus. So Virgil very dutifully does that. And Dante admires Virgil so much and is so grateful to him for bringing him along this journey. But then they get to this point at the end of purgatory, when they get to the top of the purgatorial mountain, seven-story mountain, when Virgil leaves and turns Dante over to Beatrice. So we might think, oh my goodness, this is going to be the fulfillment of all of Dante's wildest dreams when he meets Beatrice. But it's really not that at all. So it's another of many moments in the Commedia where we don't get what we expect at all, nor does Dante. So I'll just read this little, epigraph, which is from the Purgatorio section, Canto 30, where Beatrice says to Dante, Dante, though Virgil's leaving you, do not yet weep. Do not weep yet. You'll need your tears for what another sword must yet inflict. Look here, for I am Beatrice. I am. And this is the first time in the poem, by the way, that Dante's name is mentioned, the only time, that Beatrice's name is mentioned, and that they're yoked together here. Dante meets Beatrice. This cannot be what he thought it would be. The sight of her at last, so long beloved, the consummation of what was to be since his first descent from the world above to the hell he had to walk through. His aim, a meeting so much imagined and dreamt of. He stands alone and hears her speak his name, a word no soul has uttered all this time, as if forgotten. He's not the same Dante that he was when he set out. The climb has tired him and tried his pilgrim soul. He knows that he's no longer in his prime. But Beatrice will not have it. Her goal, to make her lover better than he was, to take this broken man and make him whole. She calls to him as Christ called Lazarus, urging him to leave his self-made tomb, and sets his humble name next to hers. Dante's heart is full. There seems no room for love beyond what's already there. He will learn fast. He will learn soon. The human soul's capacity to care is endless. Beatrice's love is tough. His sins confessed, they vanish in the air. Love can never be too much or enough.
Mm, thank you. He's not the same Dante. That sounds a little profound to me. Um, I'm inspired. I need to read Dante and then I need to read your book. That has to be my next reading mission. But okay, we are gonna wrap up. But before we say goodbye, Angela has graciously agreed to read a little bit more from her book. So if there's another poem or two that you think would help us kind of get a sense of this journey you're taking us on with Dante, please read a little more for us.
Okay, great. Thank you. And that, by the way, that is the highest compliment imaginable, that these poems, that this book would drive readers to Dante. because this is sort of a Cliff's Notes version of the Inferno, or I mean of the Commedia. But it's very kind. This review that you mentioned earlier, where the reviewer said that I'm kind of like Virgil, helping to guide you as Dante through the Commedia, and I love that image. But I'll read one poem from the Paradiso so that we have a representative poem from the Paradiso. We had one from the Inferno, one from Purgatorio, so Paradiso, and then just an epilogue poem at the end. This is one of my favorite moments in Paradiso, where Beatrice takes Dante up into the Empyrean and he gets to see all of the universe, all of the created universe from this perch. And he sees Earth in the context of eternity. And he says, "My eyes returned through all the seven spheres and saw this globe in such a way that I smiled at its scrawny image. The little threshing floor that so incites our savagery was all from hills to river mouths revealed to me." And this is called Dante's Smile. The astronauts who saw the Earth wept. Hanging in the black of space, it shone like the prize they thought it was, a secret kept from ordinary men. They saw our home in all of its blue beauty and its charm. Truth they guessed but hadn't fully known. But Dante saw it clearer, saw the harm we do ourselves and the ones we love. He was surprised, utterly disarmed to see from such a distance, so far above, pettiness and the violence of our days, viciousness by even him undreamt of. And from his perch in heaven, in his days, he smiled, as the Creator must smile too, to see our vanity, the brazen ways we do the things we're not supposed to do, and still think mercy's what we ought to get. Though surely Dante's smile is full of rue, a man who knows remorse and regret for his own sins. Perhaps that's why he turns his gaze to Beatrice, though it's unmet, thus to let her know what he has learned, that folly is the rule among our kind, the gift of grace undeserved and unearned, the only source of joy we'll ever find. And I'll close out with there are two epilogue poems at the end. One is called Dante Darling. The other is called Dante's Bargain. They're both sonnets, so maybe I'll just read one after the other. Dante, darling, you are the balm. We all know it too. Our hearts belong only to you. Your starved Ugolino haunts us still long after the cover is closed on your dope epic, your killer book. No Medusa with her killer look could keep us out of your heaven or your hell. Like Juliet, your Francesca knows the price of love, the name of the rose she aches to hold to her aching breast. Because of you, we know the rest of her story. We too know that you wept as you told it, as good Virgil guides the truest of lovers to paradise. And then finally, I'll close with Dante's Bargain. Very short lines, very short sonnet. Dante gave all he owned for a piece of Florentine sky, a star above the firmament, a blaze that has not died, despite the 700 years that came and quickly went. His tale of exile and his tears, the lifetime that he spent composing lines, creating rhymes to make the perfect poem, have all survived the test of time. No poet's better known. He earned his fame. He paid the price. A Dante doesn't happen twice.
Oh, wonderful poems. Thank you so much for sharing all these with us today. Anyone out there who's interested in reading more, we have so many links for you in the video description below. You can check out the review of this book we've been talking about. You can find a link to buy the book. You can read all the poems that Angela has published in the Christian Century. And then there'll be the link to Angela's personal website with all of her books there and different writings. Angela, thank you so much for being with us today and reading these poems.
Absolutely, John. Thank you so much for spending the time with me today. And thank you for the beautiful work you do in Christian Century. I'm such a fan, and I'm a great fan of Jill Baumgartner and a great friend of hers for many years. So what you do in everything is great, and I'm particularly grateful for your work in bringing wonderful poetry to our attention all the time.
Oh, thank you so much. And cut. Um, all right.